The United Kingdom is broken. Politicians love to talk about jobs. They point to the charts and boast about record employment. They say more people are working than ever before. Technically, they are right. But they will never tell you this. The average British household is now £8,800 a year poorer than comparable European families. Real wages have been flat for 15 years. Over 1 million workers are trapped on 0-hours contracts, and millions of people in Britain still work full-time and live in poverty. So what is happening to this country? How does a nation with record employment produce so many broke citizens? And is this just Britain's problem, or a warning for your country too? 10 years after Brexit, we need to ask the real question: was it a bold act of liberation or a fatal mistake? But the truth is this: Brexit was only the final shock. Britain had already started to break. This is one of the most important economic lessons of modern history. This is the real story of the United Kingdom. Welcome to Amazing Europe. When you want to understand the health of a nation, don't just count jobs. Look at what those jobs actually pay. Because in Britain, something broke after the financial crash of 2008, and it never recovered. Here's the hard truth. For the past 15 years, real wages in the UK have completely flatlined. 15 years. No real growth for the average worker. And this is not some dramatic opinion. Economic researchers call it the worst wage stagnation since the end of the Second World War. If British salaries had kept rising at the old pre-2008 pace, the average worker today would be earning about £11,000 to £14,000 more every single year. Instead, that money is gone. And you can see the damage when you compare Britain with its neighbours. Back in 2007, British families were richer than German and French ones. Today, that has completely reversed. A typical British household is now 9% poorer than a French one and 16% poorer than a German one. In absolute terms, the average UK family is now £8,800 a year worse off than comparable European households. So how does this happen? How do you get record employment and poorer citizens at the same time? The answer is simple. Not all jobs are equal. Britain did not create millions of secure, well-paid careers. It created a workforce trapped in insecurity. The system shifted away from stable contracts and toward the gig economy. And since 2011, insecure work has exploded. Today, over 1.2 million people in the UK are on 0-hours contracts. Officially, they have jobs. That keeps the unemployment numbers low and gives politicians something to celebrate. But in reality, their employer does not owe them a single hour of work. No guarantee, no stable income, no security. That is the trade Britain made. It traded real productivity for cheap labour. Today, nearly 4.5 million jobs in the UK, about 1 in 6, pay less than what is needed for a decent standard of living. And it gets worse. According to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, millions of people living in deep poverty are in households where someone works full-time. That is the great British productivity puzzle. For generations, having a job was supposed to be the way out of poverty. In Britain today, it is often only the way to survive. The system was built to make the numbers look good on television, while quietly forcing people to work more just to afford less. And to understand how this started, we have to go back to the moment Britain thought it had found the formula for endless wealth. When people talk about the UK economy, they make one basic mistake. They treat Britain like one country with one economy. It isn't. Geographically and economically, the United Kingdom is split in two. On one side, you have London and the South East, a hyper-productive, wealthy fortress. On the other side, you have large parts of the North, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, trapped in a long cycle of managed decline. They all live under the same flag. They do not live in the same economy. The numbers are brutal. Today, London's GDP per head is around £63,000. In the north east of England, it is under £27,000. That means a person in the capital is living in an economy that is more than twice as large as someone just a few hours away. And the gap is not just about wages or output. Almost 60% of all digital and tech value in the entire country is concentrated in London and its suburbs. The rest of Britain is left fighting for the leftovers. How did the divide get this extreme? Not by accident, by design. For decades, the British state poured money into the capital while starving the rest of the country of serious investment. Look at transport. Between 2012 and 2023, the government spent over £1,100 per person every year building shiny new trains and infrastructure in London. In the north, it spent just £480 per person. Think tanks estimate that if the north had received the same level of investment as the capital, it would have had £140 billion more to rebuild its towns and factories. Instead, the provinces were left behind. Traditional industries disappeared. In their place came low-paying warehouses, call centres, and fragile service work. But here is the cruelest part of the British model. Even the supposed winners are losing. London is the richest region in the UK, but it is also one of the most unequal. It is packed with millionaires, yet it also has some of the highest poverty rates in the country. Why? Because when wealth is concentrated in one place, housing becomes unaffordable for everyone else. Today, a private renter in London spends around 40% to 50% of their income just keeping a roof over their head. Millions of Londoners work 40 hours a week and still depend on food banks to feed their children. They are poor inside one of the richest cities on earth. That is the real poison in the British system. Not just the divide between north and south, but the fact that even in London, the winner's circle is full of people one step away from crisis. It created anger, deep anger, and that anger was waiting for a target. To understand how a rich nation broke itself, we have to go back in time. Long before Brexit became a slogan, the British government made a Faustian pact. It chose to sacrifice the real economy in exchange for an empire built on paper wealth. And this is not just a British story. It is a warning for the entire West. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, politicians like Tony Blair and Gordon Brown embraced what they called light touch regulation. The logic sounded brilliant. Strip away the rules for the banks, let the City of London do whatever it wanted, and in return, the government would collect billions in tax revenues to fund schools, hospitals, and public services. For a while, it looked like a miracle. At its peak, London alone was generating nearly 30% of all UK tax revenues. The country became dangerously dependent on the financial sector, and once that happened, nobody in power cared much about making real things anymore. By 2007, the damage was already visible. The UK was importing far more than it was exporting, with a current account deficit of 5.7% of GDP. That was one of the worst deficits in the developed world. In plain English, Britain was buying foreign cars, foreign electronics, and foreign goods using the imaginary profits of London bankers. So why did people feel rich? Because the system was not built on production, it was built on debt and bricks. Between the late 1990s and 2007, house prices in the UK almost tripled, and that created a powerful psychological illusion, the wealth effect. People looked at their homes rising in value and convinced themselves they were richer, but most of that wealth was fake. It was locked inside property prices and borrowed money. Banks helped turn that illusion into cash. Through a practice called mortgage equity withdrawal, households borrowed against rising home values as if their houses were ATM machines. They took out bigger loans to buy new cars, flat-screen TVs, and holidays in Spain. The lifestyle looked healthier than it was. Under the surface, the numbers were terrifying. The household debt-to-income ratio exploded from 85% in 1997 to 160% in 2007. That was not prosperity. That was a national credit binge. And yet, politicians stood on television and claimed they had solved the old cycle of boom and bust. They had not solved anything. They had simply pushed the crisis into the future. Then, in 2008, the music stopped. The global financial crisis hit, and the whole house of cards collapsed. The government had to use billions of taxpayer money to rescue the London banks. But instead of making finance pay for the damage, they made the rest of the country absorb the cost. Austerity followed. Brutal austerity. Local councils in the poorest parts of the north saw their budgets cut by up to 24%. The people who had benefited the least from the financial boom were now forced to pay the bill for it. That is the central lesson Britain gives the rest of Europe. If a nation abandons factories, real production, and decent contracts in order to worship speculation and property bubbles, it is writing its own suicide note. You cannot build a stable society on consumer debt and expensive houses. When the bubble bursts, the elite gets rescued and the working class gets the bill. And in Britain, that bill was paid in anger, pure anger, an anger that was about to change history. By the time the Brexit referendum arrived in 2016, the United Kingdom was already a fractured nation. For years, politicians and the media had been talking past each other. On one side were the leavers, often dismissed as nostalgic or manipulated. On the other side were the remainers, often seen as an out-of-touch elite. But if you look at the economic reality, a deeper truth emerges. Both sides had valid reasons, and both sides made fatal mistakes. Start with the leavers. Why did they vote to tear the system apart? Not because they were ignorant. They did it because, for millions of them, the system was already broken. Studies from institutions like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation show the same pattern again and again. The Leave vote exploded in deindustrialized areas, among people pushed to the margins for decades. These were communities that saw factories close in the 1990s, watched their young people leave for London, and then absorbed the worst of the austerity cuts after 2008. For a worker in a forgotten town in the north of England, the European Union did not feel like opportunity. Free movement of capital and labour did not feel like freedom. It felt like pressure. It felt like another decision made somewhere else by people who would never pay the price. And they had a point. Immigration did not hurt the national average wage, but official research from the Bank of England confirmed that it did put a small downward pressure on the wages of low-skilled workers. For people already struggling at the bottom, that mattered. They saw local services under strain, pay squeezed, and politicians in Westminster bragging about a growing economy that did not seem to exist where they lived. So when they voted for Brexit, they were not simply voting against Brussels. They were throwing a brick at the glittering shop window of London. They were voting against a status quo that had abandoned them. They wanted to take back control because they felt they had nothing left to lose. But this is where the Remain side had the economics right. Leaving the European single market would create a serious economic shock. It would raise barriers to trade, reduce investment, and make the country poorer over time. And the long-term data now backs that up. The Office for Budget Responsibility confirms that Brexit is shrinking the UK's long-term productivity by 4%. Trade volumes with Europe are roughly 15% lower than they would have been in a Remain scenario. And before the recent global energy crisis, studies from the London School of Economics showed that the drop in the pound after the 2016 vote pushed UK inflation up by 1.7%, costing the average worker nearly a week's wages in a single year. So yes, creating friction with your biggest trading partner damages the economy. But if Remain had the numbers, why did it lose? Because it had a social blind spot. During the campaign, Remain talked almost entirely about GDP graphs, stock market stability, business confidence, and the needs of large corporations. It defended an economic model that worked well for university graduates in London, while barely acknowledging the anger in the rest of the country. It could not understand why someone would risk the economy. What it failed to see was that for millions of people, that economy was already a daily nightmare. And that brings us to today. Has Brexit solved the problems that drove people to vote leave? Yes and no. Cutting off cheap European labour did create staff shortages, and that forced businesses to raise nominal wages just to find workers. In that sense, one of the promises of Brexit did happen. But in reality, it is a statistical illusion. Why? Two reasons. First, inflation ate the wage gains alive. British workers may have more money in their pockets, but they can buy less than they could in 2018. Second, and more importantly, the core problem never changed. Britain still has weak productivity. Britain still lacks high-quality contracts. Britain still depends too much on low-value work. Without those things, higher nominal wages are just a response to a higher cost of living. They do not make the country richer. They do not make the economy stronger. They do not fix the foundation underneath. So Britain spent nearly a decade arguing about borders and trade deals, while the real problem remained untouched. That is the tragedy. But now, you may be wondering, is everything lost? Is there any way back for the UK? The truth is, there is. Britain still has some of the most powerful tools for economic recovery in the world. But before we get there, if you found this documentary insightful and want to support our channel, take 1 second to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. It helps us make more deep dive documentaries like this one. And tell us in the comments, which European country should we investigate next? Is the United Kingdom a failed state? Absolutely not. Despite a decade and a half of political chaos, Britain remains one of the most intellectually and technologically advanced countries in the world. Its real potential is enormous. The problem is that, right now, much of that potential is locked inside a small elite. Look at what the UK is actually good at. It is a global powerhouse in artificial intelligence. Universities like Oxford and Cambridge remain among the best in the world for science and research. Britain is also the European leader in offshore wind capacity, producing huge amounts of clean energy, and it is a major hub for biotechnology. On paper, this should be a country built for the future. But there is the catch. At the moment, these sectors mostly enrich university graduates in London and the South East. An advanced technology sector is not enough if it remains disconnected from the real economy of the entire nation. A country cannot be healed by creating a handful of winners in one corner while the rest is left behind. What Britain needs is a human solution. It needs to stop behaving like a giant hedge fund and start behaving like an industrial power again. That means taking elite technologies and turning them into real jobs, real factories, and real investment in the provinces. Offshore wind is the perfect example. It does not just need finance and slogans. It needs steel, heavy engineering, ports, logistics, and skilled manual labour. Those are exactly the kinds of industries that once powered the north of England. Artificial intelligence should not be used only to write code in London offices. It should be used to automate and upgrade manufacturing in the Midlands, in Wales, in the north, and beyond. And that means infrastructure too. The country needs modern transport networks that actually connect forgotten regions to the new economy. It needs to stop relying on a system built around precarity. The 0 hours contract model has to go. In its place, Britain needs stable work, better contracts, and wages that allow families to plan for the future, instead of just surviving month to month. You do not fix the UK by turning everyone into a software engineer. You fix it by bringing high-tech industry back to the working class. That is the real lesson here. And it is not just a British lesson. It is a warning for the entire Western world. If a nation abandons its real industries and depends instead on financial speculation, property bubbles, and low-wage gig work, it is not modernising. It is hollowing itself out. It is destroying its middle class from the inside. Eventually, the numbers may still look impressive, but the people will know they are poor. And maybe there is an even deeper lesson in all this. Over the last decade, we have started treating politics like a football match. We pick a side, and then we assume the other side is stupid, ignorant, or evil. But what if the real breakthrough came from listening instead of shouting? What if the Remainers had understood the desperation behind the Leave vote? And what if the Leavers had taken the economic warnings seriously before the break became permanent? Britain could have repaired its economy without tearing itself apart. Because healing a nation takes more than money. It takes respect for the people who build it. And what do you think about Brexit? What has changed for the United Kingdom? And for you personally, if you are British? Let us know in the comments. And if you want us to investigate the situation in your country, write it below as well. For a broader view of the issue, we recommend this video, where we rank European countries by median income. That's all for today. See you next time.